Welcome to Sober Psychology, the podcast where we rip the Band-Aid off of your bullshit excuses and dive headfirst into the messy, beautiful chaos of the human mind. I'm Michael, your host, psychologist-in-training, recovered alcoholic, and the guy who's read enough textbooks and seen enough real-world train wrecks to know that recovery ain't a straight line. It's a dang scribble. And that's a fact, folks. Today we're tackling relapse in drug and alcohol addiction. It's that moment where you fall off the wagon, face plant into a bottle of Jack, and then snort your way back to square one. If you're expecting fluffy platitudes or a pat on the back, you're in the wrong place, I assure you. Although we would love to have you here, but you're in the wrong place. We're going raw, we're going real, and maybe a little ruthless because sugarcoating addiction is like putting a bow on a dumpster fire, I guess. It's just absolutely pointless. This addiction disease does not fight fair, so why should we fight fair against it? Here's the deal. Relapse isn't just a slip. It's a psychological landmine. 1 minute you're fine, and then the next you're chugging vodka in a gas station bathroom wondering how you got there. Don't ask me if I know what that's like, because I plead the fifth.
I plead the fifth.
Whatever. By the end of this episode, you'll get why relapse happens, what the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book says about it, and how science actually backs up the brutal truth that your brain is both your best friend and your worst enemy. So stick around because we're about to unpack some hard-hitting truth that'll make you laugh, cry, or maybe just throw your phone across the room. I don't know, or all the above. But let's go ahead and dive in. Welcome to the show where we break down the mental health stigma, navigate sobriety with humor, and prove that it's okay to laugh while you heal. Let's get real, let's get honest, and maybe a little weird. Growth is messy, but you don't have to do it alone. This is Sober Psychology. Well, folks, welcome back. Another week. We are at episode 41. I'm getting better at remembering what those are like, and I wanted to dive into relapse. I wanted to talk about it. I had another close friend who, I guess the proper term for everyone to understand is fell off the wagon, but it's a prevalent issue in the recovery community. It's something that the more I dive into the psyche of the human mind as a recovered guy, it just keeps popping up. So I was like, you know what, let's just do it. This is going to be a pretty short episode, but it's going to be hard-hitting truth. I'm not going to throw in, if you go back and look at any of the other episodes, you know my story. I'm not going to infuse a bunch of my story in with this. However, I'm going to hit you with truth, and I tried to delicately intertwine the science that backs all of this too. As you all know, I'm a big book thumper. I'm a 12-step recovery guy. I'm a firm believer in what the big book has to offer, what it says. And although AA does not own a monopoly on recovery, so I don't want you to think that because I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the references of the big book, that's not the only way for this to happen, right? That is a framework. It doesn't own a monopoly. Does it give you, in my opinion, one of the best runs at recovery? 100%. I mean, thousands of men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. It says it right there at the beginning. And so I know for a fact that the 12-step program works. I know for a fact that the information that's in the big book is relevant and prevalent to the recovery process and maintaining sobriety as well. So that's where my heart's at, and that's where I'm coming from. However, because this is a podcast based on the psychology of the human mind as well, we're going to go ahead and throw in a lot of psychological research that I looked up that backs and parallels with everything that's in the big book. We're not going to go into a huge history of it all, but we've talked about it briefly, I think, on this. But if you go back and look at the origins of the big book in AA, it came from Carl Jung. Right. So Carl Jung, and this was the big book. The big book was finalized, I guess, in the 30s, 1930s. but the process began in the 1920s with Bill W. And Bill W. is the guy that just kind of refined everything, right? You had the Oxford group, and you have the history of that. But if you go back and look at the very, very beginning of where all of this really started to take place, it's a fascinating story. But Carl Jung, who, by the way, I'm tackling his book right now, and as y'all know, he's one of my philosophical heroes, I guess, if you will. He had a conversation with a guy who was trying to get sober, and they couldn't understand the malady. They couldn't understand why people kept going to the drink and going to the opium and going to whatever the substance was at the time that was really prevalent. And so this guy ended up going to, I believe it was to Switzerland, and that's where Carl Jung was. And he was, helping out at a mental institution, because that's pretty much how they handled you back in the day. If you had an addiction to a substance, you just got thrown into a psych ward, and they ran a bunch of tests on you, and oftentimes it didn't work, right? But Carl Jung is a guy who came into the science world as a psychologist, a psychiatrist, philosophy in general. But he started realizing that there's a spiritual element to all of this. And he was scared to admit that and to say that, because he would become discredited. Back in the day, if you're in the field of science, you can't intertwine religion into that, right? And you would be seen as a kook. And so a lot of Carl Jung's work would have been discredited. But he ended up telling the story to this guy, who ended up telling it to another guy, who told it to Ebby Thatcher. They just kept going and going and going, right? And then it got to Bill W., right? And the guy that helped get Bill W. sober and brought him through the 12 steps. And if you read it at the very beginning of Bill's story, the very first chapter of the big book, it shows Bill going through the work all in one go, right? And you got to imagine how intense that night was. But the guy who was bringing him through the work was the second or third guy that this kind of telephoned down to from Carl Jung. So it's fascinating, right? And that really helped me out as someone who's digging into psychology, because I am at the point where I value and believe in what the big book has to say, and as far as the recovery program and working the steps, but I know that there's more to it. That's a framework. That's a baseline. And by God, when you are looking for that flimsy reed to hang on to, it works. It's fascinating. But there comes a point where there's more exploration to be done, and that's where I'm at now in my life and my journey. But when I found out that Carl Jung was involved, I was all on board, man. So it's a really cool story. I challenge you to go look it up. We're not going to talk about it any more than what we're talking about it now, but go look up the origins of it, and it's fascinating, right? I know a lot of people think that AA is a cult, and I get it. I understand it. But I'm telling you, this is what any member of a cult would say. Once you're in it, it's not a cult, right? Like, once you see the benefit of it, it's not a cult. AA is not there to solve your problems. AA is there to help guide you into the right direction. Okay, that's all it is. You're like a freaking wild bull, and someone's putting you into the corral, right? That corral, in a sense, is the framework of what the big book has to offer. So you can be skeptical all you want about it, but it does work. And I promise you, I'm the product of it. I know a lot of other dudes and ladies who are the product of the 12-step program, but there's also psychology, right? And so that's what we're going to try and do in this episode. So anyways, let's dive right in. Relapse isn't failure. It's your brain pulling a sneaky bitch move. And here's how to catch it before it catches you. All right. Section 1 of this, we're going to talk about what the hell is relapse anyways, right? We're just going to kind of define it as we typically do on this channel. So let's start with the basics. Relapse isn't just, oops, I drank it again. I think I did it again. That's pretty good. It's a process, right? It's not an event. The big book, which is just that sacred tome of recovery wisdom, it calls it the return to insanity, right? Page 30 says, we are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and the humiliation of even a week or a month ago, okay? The translation of that is your brain is a lying bastard, and it forgets the time that you woke up in a ditch with a burrito stuck to your face, and it whispers, hey, one more hit won't hurt. And spoiler alert, it will hurt. You'll hear this said a lot in recovery communities, and it's said in the book, like, my brain is trying to kill me and make it look like an accident. That is an addict's brain. My brain will forget how bad it actually was. I will forget the depths that I went to, because in that moment, all I'm looking for is my next drink. All I'm looking for is that next hit. And so I'll completely disregard everything that happened before then. All the hurt, all the pain, your body shutting down, the people that you hurt, the chaos, the going to jail, all this kind of stuff, all because I'm looking for that next escape. And that's not normal, right? That's going back to the insanity of it, which, as we know, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, that is insanity, right? So psychologically, relapse is a breakdown in self-regulation. Okay, there's a 2018 study in the Frontiers in Psychiatry that found that relapse often stems from a combo of stress, environmental cues, and weakened prefrontal cortex activity. And we all know what the prefrontal cortex is around here. It's the part of your brain that's supposed to say, hey, dumbass, like, put the pipe down. Like, this may not be a good idea. It's the adult part of the brain. Like, I'm going to reason with you here. Stress hormones like cortisol begin to mess with your decision making, making you more likely to cave when life throws you a curveball. And let's be real, life's always throwing curveballs. You lost your job, that's relapse. You fought with your partner, that's relapse. You saw a beer commercial with a sexy polar bear, relapse, okay? All right, so maybe not the last one, but you get the picture. The big book absolutely nails this on page 24. It says the alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others, right? Relapse isn't just about you. It's a wrecking ball to every single person around you. And here's the dark humor in it, if there is any humor in any of this. You're out here thinking that you're Tony Soprano mastering your own destiny, when really you're just a hamster on a wheel chasing the next high while everyone else ducks for cover, right? It's absolute chaos nonstop. Right? Your brain's like, one more drink won't hurt, but next thing you know, you're karaoke singing Sweet Caroline to a room full of strangers. Sweet Caroline, ba, ba, ba. Relapse is a sneaky bastard. I am fortunate. I haven't relapsed yet. I guess I'm the white buffalo or whatever, the unicorn, but I do know that before I went into recovery, there were those times where I did everything that I could physically, emotionally think to do to stop drinking. And I would go for as long as I could, and it would immediately go back to the exact same thing over and over again. And I noticed, looking back at my past, how short those times of sobriety actually got. Because at the beginning, I could stop for, a month. I wouldn't touch anything for a month, and I'm good. And then by God, after 30 days, it was like I'm right back at it. And it's like I never missed a beat. And then it slowly but surely over the course of a couple of years got to the point where I could barely make it a day, without drinking, before I was like, all right, I gotta get back into it. And it happened so fast. It's interesting the way the big book puts it too, because it talks about, crossing the threshold. Like imagine just crossing the threshold of a doorway. And, maybe that you're not supposed to go into that room. You know that whatever is in that room is nothing but disaster, but it's as simple as just peeking your head in. I cross that threshold and boom, I'm right back into it. It's very terrifying. It's difficult for us addicts and alcoholics to explain this to non-addicts and alcoholics, because you know how many times I've had people tell me, well, why didn't you just quit? I wish it was that easy. I am one hard-headed son of a bitch. I promise you that. And anything that I set my mind to, I just go all out, right? Maybe that's my addictive personality. This was the one thing I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't stop. I didn't have any power behind any of this, right? My life had become unmanageable. And that's the hard part for us addicts and alcoholics, is we're looked down on by society. We're looked at as less than. That's why back in the day, they used to just throw us into an insane asylum, because why can't you just stop? You got a problem, right? And it's tough. It's tough. Before we go on to the next section, I just wanted to go around and say thank you all for being here. Thank you. We forgot to do our camera rounds. Thank you. Thanks for being here. We'll go back to the family photo here. Hey, thanks everybody. Thank you for being here. Great. Now we're back. That's all I needed to do. Section 2 of this is the psychological traps of relapse. Okay, now we're going to dig into, we've defined a little bit of what relapse is. We're going to dig into the psychology of this and kind of help you see the traps that may be there as set out for you, right? Or you set out for yourselves, because we don't point the blame to anybody else. So why do we relapse? We're going to break it down. The big book talks about the spiritual malady on page 64. It's that empty void in your soul that's constantly screaming for a fix when life gets tough. And psychologically, this tracks with the self-medication hypothesis. There's a 1997 study by, I'm going to butcher the name, but it's Kantsian, Kantzian, I believe, but it was in the Harvard Review of Psychiatry that says that people use substances to numb emotional pain, which what falls under that umbrella for emotional pain is like grief, trauma, or just the soul-crushing monotony of folding fitted sheets.
Gingerly take your arm out and lag.
Yeah. I freed one.
Yes.
Okay. All right, now it's a straight jacket.
We all know how miserable that can be. But here's the kicker. Drugs and alcohol don't fix the void. They just keep digging it deeper and deeper and deeper, right? We've talked about this whole like chasing of the dopamine, right? It'll make you feel good for a little bit, all to have a bigger dip on the back end of that, right? It'll bring you up and then it drops you down even lower than you were before. And that's why a lot of people that are in recovery, or a lot of people that are struggling with addiction, a lot of that shame happens, and then it ultimately results in suicide in a sense. And even if it's not, a very proactive way of suicide, where it's more of like a slow death. Like an alcoholic death is really miserable. Your body shuts down, your liver shuts down. You get you can have real skinny arms, but you have this huge belly. Everything's swollen. People will overdose intentionally, knowing full well what's going to happen. It's really tough. It's because every time you get that little bit of a high, that little bit of a dopamine chase and a rush, it dips even lower the next time, and you keep dropping over and over again over years of doing this, right? And then there's the whole cue reactivity trap, which it's like your brain's like the Pavlovian dog, if you will, Pavlovian dog salivating at the sight of a dive bar, the smell of weed, whatever, right? There's a 2016 meta-analysis in neuroscience and biobehavioral reviews that found that addiction hijacks your brain's reward system, making cues like that neon Bud Light sign, right? It triggers dopamine spikes that scream, just do it, just go for it, right? And then the big book calls this the phenomenon of craving, which is on page XXIV, I believe. It's not just wanting a drink. It's your brain throwing a tantrum like a toddler who denied a second cookie, right? Or who was denied a second cookie, right? And don't even get me started on denial. Page 30 of the big book says that the idea somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. Does that sound familiar to anybody? That sounds familiar to me, all right? You tell yourself, I got this, while pouring a just one shot. It turns into a blackout every single time, right? Psych research backs this up. There's a 2020 study in addiction that showed that overconfidence in one's ability to moderate is a top predictor of relapse. Okay, and here's the spoiler alert for you, right? Moderation is a myth for alcoholics and addicts, period. You're not sipping wine like a French aristocrat. You're chugging it like a frat bro at a kegger, right? You can never do the moderation. You've got the peculiar mental twist that, and I did this all the time too, where it's like, okay, instead of drinking liquor, I'll just drink wine, or I'll just drink beer, something that's not the hard liquor. I'll be okay every time. It's the exact same result, nonstop. I'm going to cycle back into that insanity over and over again. You think you can have just one? Yeah, good luck. That's great. That's like telling a shark to just nibble at the surfer, right? Just get a little taste and you're good. No, he's going to absolutely devour you every single time. All right? I got to have water before this next one. I'm struggling. I'm yelling at y'all. All right, moving on. Section 3 of this is the AA playbook versus science. And again, I didn't get anything. You're not going to find a whole lot of science that negates the big book or that fights against the big book. It will elaborate. It will expand upon it, right? But so this is talking about how the AA is going to give you these concepts and ideas based on the big book, and science backs all of this up, right? So let's talk solutions, basically, right? The big book is it's like the Bible for recovery, if you will, and it's got some gems for sure. So step 1, admitting that you're powerless. That isn't just spiritual mumbo jumbo, it's cognitive restructuring. There's a 2019 study in the Journal of Substance Abuse and Treatment that found that accepting your lack of control over addiction rewires your brain to prioritize long-term goals over short-term highs. And that's very big. Step 2, believing in a higher power. That doesn't mean that you need to start praying to a cosmic sky daddy. It's about surrendering your ego, which, let's be honest, it's a raging narcissist who thinks that it can outsmart heroin. It can't. It can't do it. Promise you that. The Big Book also pushes the 12 steps as a relapse prevention tool, right? So then you have step 10, which is the daily self-inventory. It keeps you honest. And then you have page 84 that says we vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past, right? Science agrees. There's a 2021 study in psychology of addictive behaviors that found that daily reflection reduces impulsivity, which is a relapse's best friend, right? But here's where AA gets real brutal. It calls you out on your bullshit. There's page 94 that says, outline the program of your action, explaining how you made a self-appraisal, how you straightened out your past, and why you are now endeavoring to be helpful to him. In other words, stop whining, own your mistakes, and help someone else, all right? It's not therapy. It's a swift kick in the ass, okay? And this is all about getting out of yourself, right? We have to, in order to completely get out and get free, we have to dig into the crap. And yeah, we can go into the Freudian theory, whatever, but you got to let go of the garbage that you're carrying on. You got to clean up your side of the street. You have to be as available as possible to now be able to turn all of this into an asset to help other people. Because when I'm helping someone else, who am I not thinking of? Me, right? And this is part of the problem with relapse, is that you're so self-consumed with yourself. It's all me. I'm going to take. I'm going to whine and cry about my circumstances. I'm going to blame everybody else for what's going on. The last thing I'm going to do is take accountability for my own actions. But if I get to a point where I'm free, right? Like there's nothing that anybody can bring up with me about my past that's going to drag me down. And it doesn't mean that I'm better than you. It just means that I got to a point where I'm free from that. I had to take a hard look into it and realize how much of a piece of shit I have been my entire life. And then I had to go further and realize, okay, these are the things that typically will trigger me, the consistent themes that show up over and over again in my life. I got to figure out why that's happening. And then once I get to that point of being free from all of that, doing the inventory, doing what's right, what's correct, surrendering my life to a higher power. I am not the center of the universe. I'm not the puppet master. I can't control anything or anybody other than my own actions in this right now. And once I'm free in that, now here we go. Step 12, I'm going to start helping other people. I'm going to give all of this back. I'm going to weaponize all of this to be able to help the next brother who's struggling, who's in the trenches, to say, hey, look, this is the direction that you go to get out. Let's go. And while I'm helping him or her, I'm not thinking about me anymore. I'm thinking about how can I be of service, right? And that's that's why I sign off every freaking episode with go help somebody, because that is it. That's it. I'm going to get out of myself. I'm going to stop being so consumed with me and worried about me. But in order to get to that point, you have to become aware of what it is that's dragging you down. You can't just pretend it doesn't exist. It does exist. It will come back and get you. It will continue to weigh you down, and it will wear you out to the point that you have nothing left to give anybody. You become the freaking tornado that destroys everything in its warpath. All right? Here we go. So science actually adds some extra tools to this. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. We talk about it all the time. It's a beast for relapse prevention, okay? There's a 2013 meta-analysis in, Clinical Psychology Review that showed that CBT reduces relapse rates by teaching you to spot triggers and reframe your thoughts, right? You pair that with mindfulness, and yeah, I know. You hear mindfulness, you hear all this stuff. It sounds like hippie nonsense, but there was a 2022 study in the JAMA Psychiatry that found that mindfulness-based relapse prevention cuts relapse risk by about 20%. Okay, it's like AA's step 11, which is, the meditation and the prayer aspect, but with less incense and more brain scans, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. Right, but this is the constant work that we talk about. We've talked about neuroplasticity. We've talked about the fact that your brain can change. It can rework itself, but you've got to do it, right? We've got to constantly be working. And we get to constantly work. It's not a chore when you're working for your own freedom. Come on. AA is like trust God and clean house, and science is like rewire your brain and stop being a dumbass. Both work. Both of them work. So just go ahead and pick your poison, I guess. Section 4 of this is the brutal truth about relapse. Okay. So here's where we're going to get raw. Maybe. Relapse doesn't mean that you're a failure. It means that you're human. But don't use that as a cop-out, right? The big book doesn't coddle you. On page 31, it says, we do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself, okay? If you're relapsing, you're not unlucky. You're ignoring the warning signs. That fight with your boss, that's a trigger, right? That old drinking buddy texting you, trigger. That voice in your head saying you deserve a break, that's your addiction talking. And it's a lying piece of shit. I promise you, right? Relapse is like signing up for a sequel to a movie that you already know sucks. You've seen Hangover Part 2. Like, why are you living it now? There's a 2017 study in drug and alcohol dependence that found that 60% of people in recovery relapse within the first year, right? And why is that? It's because they stopped doing the work. They skip meetings, they ditch therapy, or they think that they're cured, right? You don't continue to do this endeavor of self-discovery. And I know that this is like the paradox of it all, right? Like, in order for me to be as effective as possible for other people, I have to work on me, which makes me, does that make me selfish? You're constantly uncovering more and more about yourself, right? And so that's what that is basically talking about, right? If you get into this first year, you get through that first 3 months, you get sober and whatnot, and you think, okay, I'm good, I'm cured. It's going to sneak up on you very quick because you start slipping more and more and more, right? If you become very stern and plant your flag and say, okay, this is it. Like, I'm going to keep working on this. I'm going to make it my goal to keep working on me, right? Then all of a sudden you start discovering more, and you start being more aware of those triggers, and you start being more aware of those character flaws, and you're turning that over to your higher power and saying, take this away because I don't want it. And, as it says in the big book, some of those will be taken away immediately just by humbling yourself. But some of those are going to stay with you, but now you're aware of them, right? And so these triggers don't instantly rush you back into this relapse. Okay. So here's the news flash for you. Addiction is a chronic disease. It's not a bad haircut. It doesn't just go away, all right? You've got to keep working. But here's the flip side of all of this. Relapse can be an absolute wake-up call. The big book talks about hitting bottom on page 8. It's that moment when you're so broken that you finally get serious. You've got nothing left. Right? And science backs this up. There's a 2020 study in addiction research that found, and theory, that found that people who relapse and recommit to recovery often have stronger long-term sobriety because they've seen the abyss. All right. So yeah, relapse sucks, but it's not game over. It's just a plot twist. I know a lot of dudes who have been through rehab a lot. I am fortunate. I've been through it once so far. I'm not saying that I'm never going to relapse, because given the science and given, the fact that I am and will be an alcoholic for the rest of my life, I may relapse again. I don't know. Or relapse. I may go back to it. I don't know. I hope not. But there's so many dudes that have gone through. I mean, I went to rehab with some dudes that had been through rehab like 5+ times, and this was my first time. So I remember sitting there thinking, when I was talking to these cats, I was like, so what's the point of even trying? Why would I try? If it's going to take me 10 times to get sober, like, what's the point? But it's the work, right? They all had the same commonality, right? One, there was no higher power. There's no being humbled in any of this. There was no submitting and turning everything over to the will and the care of God as you understand Him, right? There was this constant arrogance that comes with recovery, typically, of like, okay, I got this. I got it figured out, right? The big book talks a lot about this fourth dimension aspect of it, and that does sound like some spiritual mumbo jumbo, and maybe it is. I don't know, but I know that this fourth dimension is real. I know that there becomes this moment where, yeah, arrogance can creep up in thinking that I got it figured out, but it's this understanding of what you are, who you are, and it's the realization that it could all be stripped away tomorrow. Everything that you have now can be gone tomorrow, right? And it's this realization that I'm going to keep working on this. I don't want to stop working on this. I don't want to go back to what I was. Okay. And it can't, in my opinion, it can't just be for the fear of relapse. It can't be for the fear of going back to that lifestyle. It has to be for the endeavor of wanting that freedom. I just want to be free. I don't want to be trapped and chained with my own nonsense that I bring on myself, right? I want to see the world differently, right? And now, especially, I know some dudes, again, I know a lot of guys that have been through rehab later on in life, and they have kids. And being a first-time dad, having an 8-month-old child, like, that's terrifying to me, but it happens. And kudos to you people who are out there with kids who realize the stakes and realize how tough it is and got sober. And now you're effective parents. That's huge. That's such a win in my book. That's so good for you. Power to you, man. That's awesome, right? But anyways, relapse is basically like your brain saying, let's remake the worst day of your life, right? Don't be the idiot who greenlights that sequel, period, okay? Relapse is an absolute bitch, but it's not the end of the story. The big book says on page 559 that we are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. That's not just AA fluff, it's the truth. Recovery is about facing your demons, not running from them. Okay? Science says the same thing. Your brain can rewire, your habits can change, but only if you put in the work. So stop romanticizing that bottle or that baggie. It's not your lover, it's your abuser. Okay? Here's your homework. Write down one trigger that you ignored last time you relapsed. And if you're someone who's not an addict alcoholic, think about something that triggers you to anger, something that triggers you to depression, one of those triggers that you just ignored, and then it put you into that spiral, right? And then all together, make a plan to dodge it next time, right? Work on it, realize it, be aware of it. Call your sponsor, hit a meeting, look at yourself in a room or lock yourself in a room with a Netflix binge until the craving passes, whatever it takes at that point, right? Find healthy ways to cope. Not saying that binging Netflix is a healthy way to cope, but find that accountability that we've talked about in previous episodes. Find your person, your people, whatever. Sometimes it's okay to say, hey, look, I need some people around me right now. I'm about to make some bad decisions. I need some people around me. They'll show up if they're the right people, right? And if you're struggling, please reach out. I'm here. I'm 100% here. You can hit me up on YouTube, comments. I'm not really good with email right now. But you can hit me up and I'll respond and I'll get with you. Okay. Drop a comment, DM me, whatever it takes. Talk to someone who's been there. Okay. You're not alone, even if your brain tells you otherwise. Okay. Anyways, thanks for tuning in to Sober Psychology. If this hit you hard, smash the like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We're here every week, ripping the veil off of the shit that holds us back. And until next time, stay sober, stay real, and don't let your brain be a dick. Spotify people, we'll see you next week. YouTube people, you know what to do. Relapse isn't the end, folks. It's your brain's way of saying you still got some shit to learn. So keep fighting. Keep your head up, keep your heart open, and go help somebody. Love you guys.